Prevent Connect is a national project of the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault, sponsored by U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The views and information provided in this web conference do not necessarily represent the official views of the U.S. government, CDC, or CalCASA.
Policies and practices, and we really like to use the text chat, and so through the text chat we really want you to engage with this topic. We have questions for you throughout, so we're really hoping to have a dialogue on how to make change in school environments for violence prevention. So I wanted to start off with kind of a question of why should we consider school environments for teen dating violence prevention and other forms of violence. And so I wanted to quickly reference Connecting the Dots, which is a publication that Prevention Institute co-authored with the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. And in it, there are different risk factors and protective factors, and one of them is about youth who feel connected and committed to school. And it shows that youth who are feeling connected and committed to school are at lower risk of harming others and themselves. And so this is kind of a protective factor both for interpersonal violence, things like teen dating violence, youth violence, bullying, and for suicide. And so we really want to dive into a conversation about school environments. And this is our second web conference talking about schools this year. And last time I showed this graphic here that I wanted to bring back up about school climate and how we can improve school climate for violence prevention. And so we want to expand our thinking about prevention beyond just the classroom setting and curriculum to really thinking about how can we create change and change norms in our schools, thinking about not just in-classroom activities, but the school community as a whole, the buildings, so the physical spaces, thinking about the school district, thinking about community around schools. And so we want to think more holistically in our approaches about school, and that means that our violence prevention efforts also should be more holistic. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today, and that's what we're defining as comprehensive efforts. So things that are looking at these different aspects through policies, practices, and education as well. And at Prevention Institute, we have a framework that we use called Thrive, and it looks at people, which is the socio-cultural environment, place, which is the physical built environment, and equitable opportunity, which is about the education and economic opportunities. And so I think that in our school environments, there's an opportunity to think about all three of these within that space as well. And so, you know, we really want to make violence a school issue, changing the norms around that, creating connections between people in the socio-cultural environment. In the physical environment, you know, we want to create warm, welcoming environments, increase visibility, and in the equitable opportunity environment, you know, school climate can really help improve student achievement and thereby hopefully improving educational opportunities for all and economic opportunities down the line. And so today our guests are going to be sharing about their comprehensive school-based work, and it's great that we have a state level and community level guest with us today. So we have Mina White from the California Department of Public Health. Mina has worked there for 17 years and has worked on conducting surveillance and program evaluation in the areas of asthma, tuberculosis, and other chronic and infectious diseases. She currently serves as an epidemiologist working on injury and violence prevention programs, including domestic violence and sexual violence, specifically for the Rape Prevention and Education Program, or RPE program. So Mina, if you want to just say a quick hello, and then I'll introduce Alaina.
Hi, everyone.
And we have Alaina, who has spent the past 4 years working as a sexual assault and domestic violence advocate at the Rape Crisis Center in California. Initially acting as the agency's prevention education coordinator, she has been focused on providing and integrating rape prevention education programming in elementary school, middle school, high school, and college-level environments outside of the Bay Area. She has a Bachelor of Science in Psychology from UC Davis and is currently acting as Safequest Solano's Director of Youth Services. So we have some great expertise to learn from today. And Alaina, just to make sure your sound is working well, if you want to say a hello as well.
Hey everyone.
Thank you for joining us. So I thought that we could start off with you, Mina. We'd love to hear from you. What does comprehensive violence prevention in schools mean to you?
Sure. Thanks everyone for joining today. So I want to start off by saying that what we're going to be talking about today is not just about the Shifting Boundaries curriculum itself, but also about how we design our sexual violence primary prevention programs to be comprehensive. If you've been on other Prevent Connect webinars, I'm sure you've seen this Social-Ecological Model and you're pretty familiar with it. In California, as part of the RPE program, we implement Shifting Boundaries as one of many sexual violence prevention program curricula as part of RPE. And along with all these other curricula that our rape crisis centers implement, we want to carry those concepts that are introduced in these curricula at the individual level and that affect the relationship level all the way upstream to the community and societal levels so that they ultimately result in school-wide changes and hopefully even go forward into the greater community eventually. All of these layers of the model are connected to each other. In the case of Shifting Boundaries, the concepts that are behind the curricula are carried throughout the levels, eventually leading to these school-wide changes that we're going to be talking about a little bit later. And first off, I want to explain a little bit about what I mean by school-wide changes. I know, especially for the Shifting Boundaries curriculum, the interventions are called building level interventions, and that's how they are sometimes referred to. But we are going to be referring throughout the webinar to these as school-wide interventions. I'm going to be using this term when I refer to the outcomes and activities that we implement as part of the RP program, since I think that's a little bit more accurate of a representation of what goes on with these activities, since they don't necessarily have to take place within a building necessarily. So CDPH, California Department of Public Health, has been funding 2 centers working on Shifting Boundaries for the past few years. One of them is Safequest Solano, which Alaina will talk more about later, and one of them is the Center for Nonviolent Community, which is in a rural town of California called Sonora.
Thanks for giving us that overview, Mina. And Alaina, can you share more about Safequest? I know Mina just introduced it, and a little bit about the school you've been working with.
Hi, yeah, this is Alaina. And so before we get started too, I just want to introduce just the agency I work for as well as the school that we were primarily focusing the Shifting Boundaries program on. So Safequest Solano, we're a nonprofit agency, and it looks like earlier from a lot of you, we're similar in that we're a dual agency for sexual assault, domestic violence. So we're the Rape Crisis Center in Solano County out in California. So for those who aren't familiar, we're between the Bay Area and Sacramento, to give you just a little idea of where we're located. We provide just a similar resources and services, intervention services, and then we also have our prevention education programming, which we've been doing over the last several years. And with that, we've been doing research on what works and what doesn't work and how we can really be effective and bring these programs into our schools.
The school that we primarily work at that we'll be talking today is a middle school for 6th through 8th grade. There's about 1,000 students, so it's fairly large. And so if you look, there's a picture of the school and some student artwork, which I'll talk about in a little bit. This school was pretty high needs, and so there were several harassment incidences, sexual harassment that's been happening at the school. The school's been pretty open about it, which has been great. And just to give you guys also a general idea of how large it is, for 6th grade, there's usually about 9 or 11 different 6th grade classes. So again, we have about 1,000 students at this school. And it's in a rural and urban area, which makes it a kind of interesting environment.
That's helpful context. And what's the, do you want to just say what the photo on the bottom left is?
Yeah, definitely. So with the Shifting Boundaries program, one thing we did and started implementing is that to keep track of all the students' data, because we have so many classrooms, we actually gave each student their own folder, which they are able to decorate. And each week when we go in and do sessions, that's where they keep all of their artwork. So, I mean, not all of their artwork, all of their worksheets. So information on what they think a boundary is when they do mapping activities and just any of the related program material. And so this is just an example of one student and one that they drew.
Great. So that context is really helpful in seeing the school and learning a little bit more. Mina, I understand that the California Department of Public Health has created an implementation guide. Can you tell us more about what that is?
Sure. Let me go on to this next slide. So it's important to understand, I think, that the infrastructure needed to roll out shifting boundaries in the curricula. So as part of CDPH's RPE program, we developed an implementation guide structured around shifting boundaries. I do want to share that this is, I didn't attach it here and it's not available right now to send out. It is available. If anyone would like to look at it, you can email me. My contact information will be at the end of this webinar. I do want to say that it is specific to our RPE program and the components that we require for RPE. So if you do want to look at it, though, I will make that available. I am currently in the middle of revising it, so that's why we didn't really want to send it out right now, but I can share it when it's ready. So I can, right now, though, give an overview of what is contained in the implementation guide. So the guide explains that the school needs to be involved in building capacity at the school level to implement the school-wide intervention. And these are the Respecting Boundaries Agreement, the school mapping, and the posters that we put up around the campus. So this is an example of the map that Alaina did around at one of her schools, and she'll be talking more about this later, so I won't go into this now. But I do want to say that it is important that this step occur, that the facilitator of Shifting Boundaries actually looks at the results of these maps that the students fill out with their hotspot mapping, and that these results are summarized for the school staff and administration, and then that they're discussed with the school itself. These are some more maps. So to implement Shifting Boundaries school-wide effectively, we really think that we need to address the data and information that are gathered to address the RBA and the Shifting Boundaries curriculum with the school administrators and the staff. And really acting on the results of the mapping and on the evaluation data is part of what the school-wide interventions involve to be able to address the system-wide changes on campus. The Shifting Boundaries program facilitators really should discuss the RBA and the Shifting Boundaries curriculum with the school staff. So that's really a key part of introducing and implementing the curriculum on the campus. They ideally will work together to revise the school policies and the protocols on dating violence and sexual harassment. And ultimately, in the end, they really are increasing that awareness and reporting of dating violence and sexual harassment on campus. The ultimate goal is to prevent this harassment from occurring.
So before we get to the text chat question, there was a question in the audience about how you quantify the maps, and I'm wondering if you have anything to share on how, that gets quantified from when youth fill them out. I'll go back to the image here.
Yeah, sorry, I kind of skipped over that.
Or Mina.
Yeah, I figured I'll give that question to Alaina. I think she's most familiar with that.
Yeah. Hi, this is Alaina. So yeah, I saw that pop up too. And so what we did, we're kind of, I guess, older school in that. So what we did is we actually just took all the maps and we would kind of have like mapping parties, if you could say. And so we would literally do a tally marks. So we would have a clean map that we would blow up a little bit. And then we would just take red, yellow, and green pens, and we would just mark in each area what color they were. When you're looking at the maps, and I'm sure several of you who've done this have experienced this as well, so sometimes the students are not very neat, and so it's kind of hard to tell what color they mean in those areas. But generally, we just take it down and tally it on a clean map, and then add up all the numbers later.
Great. Thanks. And we're lucky enough that Nan Stein's on right now and has been sharing in the text chat as well that there are some things available if you go to wcwonline.org and then type in Nan Stein, and you'll find zip files for the posters, etc. So thank you, Nan, for contributing in the text chat, and hope you can continue sharing as we go through today's session. So we would like to ask a question to the audience about what are some school-wide changes that you'd like to implement to support sexual and domestic violence prevention. So whether you've done some mapping already in schools or have seen certain issues arise with young people that you're working with, we'd love to hear kind of what are some changes that you'd like to implement. And so while you're typing that right now, I will move on and ask Alaina a question, and then we'll come back. So Alaina, we'd like to know, what does the process of gaining buy-in look like at the school that you work with? Because I know that, you've been working with shifting boundaries, but the first point of it all is to actually get in with the school, and that in itself can be tricky at times. So we'd love if you could share a little bit about that process.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I just want to say out there too that our site, our center, we had been providing prevention programming for several years before we did full implementation shifting boundaries. And so we had some connections with our schools and our school districts. So what we did when starting the Shifting Boundaries project and the full implementation Shifting Boundaries is we actually reached out to a bunch of the schools in our areas, and we asked the schools and the principals who would be interested in participating in this program. So the reason we're at this school where we are now is because the principal responded really quickly. She said that she was really interested in the program and the goals, and I will admit she was also very excited that this is a free program as well, which is always very helpful. After that, we set up some meetings with the principal, and she was very open about incidences that were happening on school campus. Not all the schools we reached out to were really open about that, which completely makes sense. And so she helped us kickstart it off. So we had conversations during summer break, before summer, before we even implemented it, so months before we even started. We also had, it was a broad MOU at the time with some of the school districts in our community, and that also helped us gain buy-in from the school districts as well. And again, those MOUs originally were pretty generic, and then we did revise them to be specific to the shifting boundaries and just the shifting boundaries component. So doing more of the school-wide implementation, so that was very important. On top of that, instead of just jumping in, we didn't start in the classrooms right away. We had several meetings with the principal. We met with the assistant principals, the counselors. We did teacher trainings. We went to all of school orientations at the beginning of the school year. We went to family nights. We went to school events, school district events throughout the city as well. And then before I even started going into the classroom, we talked to the principal and the counselor and assistant principal about how we can do the RBA, which I think we are going to get more into later. And with that, I was the main facilitator. So I was the main facilitator for our agency. We only had one prevention education person. And I went into all of the classrooms and I shadowed all of the teachers, and we started really having Safequest known at the school so that we didn't come across as an outsider, which helped a lot as well.
Yeah, it sounds like you really went at it holistically, not just thinking about the principal, but all the other key players to engage in gaining buy-in. I'd like to return to the text chat and see what's been coming up. So Ashley and Tori, would you mind sharing? I know it's been moving pretty quickly today, so yeah. What's been coming up for you?
Sure. So, Alicia, I was watching people type in, and I think a lot of people were sharing things that they're actually doing, which is really great. So folks talked about bystander intervention, norms change campaigns. Someone made a point about involving the adults in school environments, so staff and administration. Policy changes, so a code of conduct revisions and integrating teen dating violence prevention into comprehensive health education. Those are some things that I saw come up. Tori, did you have anything else?
No, I think I saw pretty much all the same. I saw there was a lot of conversation around staff training and making sure that both teachers and staff both could implement the curriculum and know how to follow up and continue their training on that.
Great. Yeah, and then the last thing that someone mentioned coaching boys into men as well. So I think in thinking about school environments more holistically, as we were talking about earlier on, and comprehensive action, even thinking about, sporting environments in schools is another addition to all of this. So Alaina, you started, already sharing how you went from calling schools to really getting to the MOU level, and sharing a bit about some of the partnerships that have been important, but I'm hoping that you can elaborate a little on that. Who have been some of the critical partners for you in implementing this work?
Yeah, so at our site, just some of the critical partnerships, absolutely. The principal, I don't want to skip over the principal. We need that buy-in. They really helped us when some of the teachers, when we first came in, were not too enthused because we were taking up class time, and so that was really helpful. As we got more integrated, though, teachers became such great partners. We have some teachers who love the mapping exercise. Most of them really do because they get to see that data. All the stuff we collect, we give back to the school so that they can use and see the data themselves. So teachers, I've had several teachers who really jumped into the program, and so they'll encourage their students. Some teachers have asked us, hey, what can we do when you're not in the classroom, and how can we continue this conversation, or here's some follow-up ideas. So that has been great. We also always ask the teachers for feedback at the end of each year so they can tell us what they like, how they think we can improve, how can we be more effective, and so forth. So they've been great. The school counselor, absolutely, we bring into, if permitting to their schedule, we like to coordinate with them so that they can come into the sessions when we talk about the RBA specifically, since they're a huge part in that whole process. Students as well, so we like to engage students as much as possible into the sessions. We want them to use their voices and really communicate what they're seeing from their end, what's going to be effective. So we encourage students to help co-facilitate the sessions with us so that it's really students hearing from each other as well which has been great seeing them do that and really have them take ownership, too, of what they want from their own environment. Parents, it's something that I know we want to increase our involvement with parents, so we actually give parents at the beginning of the school year opt-out letters and information about not just our agency and the program, but also about what we're going to be talking with our students about. We've shared the curriculum with parents, and so we'd like them to be as involved as possible. And then we've really also used our yard duties on school security. So the students at our school really respect our yard duty, and they really look up to them. And so really having them involved in the program and having them involved in the conversations that we're having has been incredibly helpful as well.
Yeah, I love that you're thinking about everyone that's involved in the school and the yard duty too, which may be an overlooked area for a lot of people. So we'd like to, we've been having a very engaged text chat, so we would like to ask you another question. How have you gained buy-in for working in and with schools? So those of you that are already doing school-based work, what's been helpful for you in gaining that buy-in to actually get into the schools and work together with them? So while you're text chatting, we're going to ask Mina another question, and then we'll come back and see what's coming up. So Mina, from learning with the two communities, what are some recommendations more generally for gaining buy-in?
Sure, and I'll go in a little bit of what Alaina already mentioned, but it really seems to be helpful to get MOUs with the school districts or with individual schools. Alaina mentioned getting MOUs with school districts, and we found that it really does pay off to also make sure that you talk with the individual schools and principals and even the staff there to make sure that they are really bought into the program. It doesn't do any good to talk to a school district and then the school itself isn't really on board or really has resistance to the program coming in. And of course, this may involve lots and lots of meetings with principals, as I'm sure Alaina can attest to. It's some legwork involved, but it really does make it a lot easier when you're actually in the classroom. One other thing that seems to help is addressing their concerns with their school climate and safety when you're talking about implementing a program there. A lot of schools or districts might have wellness plans, and shifting boundaries can really address any of these safety concerns they might have as part of that plan. This might involve some potential work with school wellness coordinators or even school-based health centers. These might be sort of different point people that you might not think about working with initially, but if these centers or these wellness coordinators do exist at your school, it really might be helpful to include them in your process. They really do have the same goals as you do in promoting resources that prevent sexual harassment and teen dating violence. So it really might be like a good idea to talk to these people. So these are some of the decision makers and gatekeepers at your school. So really making sure that they and other decision makers are on board with the program.
So Ashley and Tori, what's been coming up in the text chat in terms of how participants today have been gaining buy-in?
Hi. Yeah, so this has been a really, really lively one, and it looks like a lot of folks have found a lot of luck with already having established relationships with the school counselor or the principal or the social worker, as well as finding other community partners that are already involved with the school and building off of those positive relationships before going into an implementation process. Something else that I want to point out that someone said is to emphasize that this is a free service and a free program that they will be providing to make the schools a safer climate, as well as making it more relevant to the school by providing county level or school level statistics and data on the prevalence of teen dating violence and sexual harassment that they see. Ashley, did I miss anything in that? Is there any other key point that you wanted to bring out? No, I think a lot of what it comes down to is it is about relationship building, and if you do have a relationship with one person, like using them as kind of your champion and helping them see that there's a lot more that can be done when we're not just in a single classroom, but when we're working on more of a comprehensive playing field. So that is what I saw. I'm going to pass it back to you, Alicia.
Yeah, thanks. And Tori mentioned the data piece, and Mina, I know you're going to talk about this right now, so, how have you used data for gaining buy-in?
Yeah, and that was a good point that someone brought up in the text chat, that this really a good way to get buy-in from the schools is to use your data, whether that's evaluation data from the specific program or in this data from district-wide or school-specific data that they collect. Some of the data that we've used in the past have been data from the Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance System, the YRBS. This data is actually available on the CDC website. You can download it there, or they have reports that are on the YRBS data that you can use to show your school. We in California are lucky enough to also have a California Healthy Kids Survey, which asks some similar questions, but is available on the district and school level for some of the schools that participate in that. And again, like I said, the school-specific data on incidents, reports, or anything that the school has that they can use to really look at what their baseline data is, and then possibly compare that later on after the program has been implemented. We really want to explain how data can tell a story about the school climate. They can use stories when they put together school newsletters or provide information to their district about their school. So you can really tell them that this data will help them in the long run in being able to report good things that are happening about their school. And really sharing the data with them ensures that they'll support acting on changes based on the data. So you really want to before even doing any mapping, say like, well, this is what we're doing, and then at the end of the process, we really want to use this data to either change policies, procedures, to change whatever we find might be an issue on the school campus. And then the last point I want to say is just really remember to report back to them with either this evaluation data or with any changes in the school climate that you've been finding. Sometimes I know we can collect data and then not do anything with it, and then that really doesn't help the process of really enacting change school-wide or community-wide.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think Alaina also brought that up about, reporting back to the teachers to continue to have their investment in this. So can you share what some of the results from the data have been showing from your work with Safequest and in the school?
Yeah, and I'll go in a little bit about to the programming evaluation we've been doing as part of RPE. I do want to mention that this is evaluated only as part of the RPE program. So this includes only the sites in California implementing the full implementation of shifting boundaries. Again, this is not what wasn't a research project, and it was only part of their RPE activities. So, it really is not representative of, the program throughout the country or throughout the state even. So I do need to say that as a caveat. This evaluation only consists of pre-post surveys, and these evaluated the students who received the classroom lessons. And we have data from the 2016-17 school year and the 2017-18 school year. And these results I'm going to show are just preliminary, so they're only kind of a snapshot of what we found in California. So the preliminary results for 2016-17, just one of the points that I want to share was that we did find an increased intention to intervene when witnessing sexual harassment. So that was a nice positive finding that we saw. On the pretest, about 27% of the students said they would tell the person who is sexually harassing someone to stop. and on the post-test this increased to 34. When we go to 2017-18 school year data, the results this last year did not show a change in this same indicator. From the pre-test to the post-test, about 13% of the respondents said they would tell the person who was sexually harassing someone to stop. So I'll come back to this piece of data in a minute, so to kind of elaborate upon it. First, so the next thing I do want to share, though, is that one of the other findings that I thought was interesting on our preliminary evaluation was that we had increased reports of sexual harassment. So I'm sure many of you who have evaluated prevention programs are not surprised at this, but it does seem a little counterintuitive when you look at it. But we have found with other evaluations that we can expect increased reporting due to increased awareness of the issue, and possibly even students being more comfortable talking about sexual harassment. So I do want to mention this as something that we've found in this evaluation and in some other evaluations of prevention programs, that this may occur in the first couple of years of after a prevention program gets implemented. We would expect long-term decrease in incidents eventually. So of course we need some more long-term continued outcome evaluation. So I want to say stay tuned on this, and we hope to have some positive results to show in the future.
Great. We appreciate that overview. And Alaina, since you work directly with the community, why might not there have been a change in the 2017-2018 pre-post test results? And just generally, what have been some challenges with this work?
Yeah, no, thank you. And I know might have talked about the data. So some of the challenges, I'll just start with some of the challenges we face at our school. And one of the biggest things is we have really high staff turnover at our school, at the specific school site. So just to put that in perspective for everybody, in 3 years, we went through 3 different principals, 5 vice principals, 3 different counselors, and for our 6th grade, which we normally have about 9 to 11 6th grade teachers, only 3 of them were consistent for those 3 years. So we have a very high staff turnover. And that can be a really big issue just for a number of reasons. One, especially with changing the principals, there were a couple times where we almost had to start over just a little bit and do a little bit of backtracking to get the principal back on the same page. And 2, it's just consistency. So the students know when they're coming in, they're like, oh, this is the new principal, this is a new teacher. And so that prevents there being a sense of consistency at this particular school site. Another thing that happens is that violence or harassment on the school campus is fairly normal. So there are norms that is acceptable. There are fights that are pretty frequent, and some of those things don't come across as a boundary violation to some of these students because it's so normal. And what was interesting for me, because I was the facilitator, looking at the data and then hearing the students, is on our end or on my end, I would hear a lot of students, they use the vocabulary. So they would say, oh, you're crossing my boundary, and they might be joking about it, but they're still using the language. But when it came down to some of the results, it didn't show that there were, or the results in the pre-post test didn't show that much of a difference, or as was pointed out, not much of a difference at all in the 2017-2018 year. So, and then there was something else I wanted to touch up on. I know we're talking about media and friends and just political and economic factors are up there. And, students, none of us live in a bubble, and the students don't either. And so things that are happening outside in the community as well really affect students within the school community. And so I think that's something that probably a lot of people can relate to as well when working with the schools.
Right. And I know you sent this image to us. I'm wondering if you can share this one.
Yeah, this one was a favorite of, or a favorite. So I want to point out that in order to keep track of all the folders and which classroom students were in, if you guys look at the top left corner, it'll say sour lemon, it'll say 25. So we don't put student names on the folders, but in order to keep track of folders and forms, we assign group names to each of the classrooms, and so the students were allowed to start picking their own classroom. So one classroom is called the Sour Lemons, and so we always encourage students to decorate their folders, one, so that they can identify them again because their names aren't on it, and two, just to make it theirs and make it a little more personal. So this student, I know diversity was brought up a lot. We have a very diverse population, and so the message just says the school needs colorful people, and so we just thought that was a really cool artwork that student had done.
Yeah, that's great. Now, despite these challenges and external factors that you've been facing, I know you've been experiencing some successes, and there's things in the school environment you've been able to change, and I'm guessing this is something everyone's been waiting for, to hear, what's actually happened, what have you been doing? So would love for both of you to share more about the changes in the school environment.
So I guess I'll go first. We really see that there's 4 categories of these outcomes that go into changing a school climate and environment. There's social, cultural, physical changes, and those all affect the policies and procedures, the school staff, the students, and then just all the school relationships that go on among school staff and students themselves. And as far as the successes that we found from schools around California implementing shifting boundaries, we found that they really were able to identify gaps in student code of conduct and the accountability by the school. They are able to address these gaps in writing many times, and they're able to affect policies and procedure changes within the school. One example was from our site in Sonora. They were able to address changes in staff behavior. From some of the mapping, they identified that the students thought that there needed to be more supervision from yard duty staff, and that they needed to pay attention to students more. So since those findings, the students have reported that yard duty staff are more attentive, and that they don't just spend time out in the playground sitting and chatting with each other, and they're actually paying more attention to what's going on. Also, rape crisis center staff seem to be more integrated into the school environment, so they're seen as really almost the part of the adult allies within the school structure. The rape crisis center staff is able to really constantly reinforce their role and the importance of the issues they're talking about by having this presence on campus. So these relationships really reinforce that this project has other outcomes. They may not just be about sexual violence prevention and about sexual harassment prevention for these school communities. The work also involves, as Alicia mentioned before, connecting the dots. They address the shared risk and protective factors. And I also want to circle back to mention that we're addressing sexual violence prevention in the RPE program by addressing it in this comprehensive way. These relationships within the school may also mean that the facilitators of shifting boundaries and any of our other programs that prevent sexual violence might be asked by the school principal to do other things. For example, I know Alaina can probably speak to this a little bit more too later, but also for our site in Sonora, the school really sought out the Rape Crisis Center's resources beyond the scope of the RPE grant. So they were able to provide support for staff and their students after they had a flood a few years ago. They were able to provide workshops on providing trauma-informed services for adults. They provided empathy and self-esteem workshops for students, and they really were able to build these protective factors within the school environment. So, and then lastly, I just really want to mention that too, though, that even with these positive shifts in the school policies and procedures, we still might not see any changes within the 1 to 2 years that when you first start off with implementing curriculum, it doesn't happen overnight. it may take years before a new policy is instituted to see these outcomes shift. So especially with what we've talked about with all these external factors, all these challenges that Alaina mentioned, and all these factors we can't control, there really, it isn't just a short-term process that gets to these outcomes, and it may take a few years. Alaina, did you want to jump in with some of your successes that you've found at your school too?
Yeah, no, thank you. And then just piggybacking off of what Mina was saying, some of our successes is that, and I mentioned it a little before, is that we did notice that the students were really adapting the language and they were using it to talk about, boundaries, and not necessarily just using the language, which was great, but is that, hearing students say it. So this right here, if you look up, is a note card a student had drawn for us. So one thing that we do at a site is every time we go into the classroom, we bring in like a little box, and so it has different designs, like we have Star Wars, a lot of Star Wars stuff, and students are able to write notes or draw pictures and leave them for the facilitator if they don't feel comfortable talking out loud. And so this is just a drawing that a student had made when learning about the program. And so we noticed the students talking about the language, and they were talking about when people were crossing into their boundaries or doing things that made them uncomfortable, which is really great. And then sharing data. So as I mentioned earlier, that we share all the data with our school, and so our school actually used the mapping data that we had made, and they used it to apply for a safety and security grant, and they were actually awarded the grant. So they were able to install some security cameras in areas that students felt uncomfortable. So our school is 2 stories. It's outside, so it's not indoors. It's 2 stories, and students really felt uncomfortable in the stairwells and just other key areas around campus. And the school, on top of that, not just applied for security grant. With that grant, they also had yard duty, and they're having staff located and monitor those areas more, which it was just awarded at the end of this last year, so we'll see how that impacts the mapping and just the rest of the school environment for this coming year. So that was really exciting to see that. And then our end, I was talking about how there's high turnover at our school, but I also just want to say a huge success with us was being able to keep the program going with the high turnover. So like I said, each year we had a different principal, different school counselor, and so even with all of those changes, we were able to keep the program going, and the school had buy-in, and that was really great to see that. And then last thing, the school really did pick up once we had the RBA, or Respecting Boundaries Agreement, implemented. That was carried on each year as well, and so the school actually this last year incorporated the Respecting Boundaries Agreement as part of their student statement, and they redid some of their forms to reflect this language as well. And that was really cool to see those changes happening. And then this one I'll just talk about this. Yeah. Really briefly, so one thing we did with our 6th graders, we just brought in a large sticky tearaway sheet, and we just wrote ground rules, and we had the students create their own ground rules, and we carried this from classroom to classroom, so all the 6th grade classes saw this form. And so our only rule was that if a student wanted to add a ground rule, that we all had to adhere to that ground rule. So this is just what we're looking at here.
Thank you. And I really like what Mina was saying about the longevity of the work, and seeing outcomes in 1 year is hard. And this is really because, changing school climate isn't just implement one thing and we're going to change school climate. It really does require multiple changes to change those norms. And so I like that you've been thinking about it through various changes. So we would like to offer a space for those of you participating today to pose any questions you might have for Alaina and Mina. So we invite you to use the text chat to write down any questions there, and we're going to come back to it, see what we can answer in our time today. And while you're typing questions, we'd like to hear, what are your next steps? So Alaina, if you'd like to start.
Yeah, so some of the next steps is that we're actually expanding our program. So we are at one school that we've been talking about today, and so we were in 6th and 7th grade, and so we're going to take lessons learned from that site, and we're going to start going to a second site, which is also middle school within the same school district. They're 6th through 8th grade as well, and they're about the same classroom. And we're really excited about that because they both feed into the same high school, which we do some other programming with, so that's exciting for us. And we're going to continue our training and working closer with the yard duty. So we've done some work with them, training with them, but we really want to integrate them into the program more than we've done. So we're going to increase our training. And then our other next steps is really getting parents involved. So we want to get parents a lot more involved than they have been before. So that's something we're really excited to have those conversations with the parents.
And Mina, what would you like to share about your next steps?
So one of our next steps is really figuring out how we can reach more of the school community with the Shifting Boundaries content. So based on lessons we've learned over the past few years, not just with Shifting Boundaries implementation, but with really all the curricula that we've implemented as part of our RPE, we want to engage more adult allies in the school community. I think Alaina touched upon that, about how important that is to really talk to the staff and get a lot of the teachers on board. We really want to make it sustainable in the school setting. I think Alaina's had a great example of that, about how her presence on the school campus shows how Safequest really did that at the school they were at. We really want to have more youth involved in enacting change in their own school environments. So having more youth involved, we feel like that might counteract the reactions to their current school environment. As Alaina mentioned, there's a lot of these external forces that may counteract the messaging of the program. And our hope is really that it doesn't just come across as another thing that they have to learn by having an adult stand there and talk to them about, shifting boundaries, about healthy relationships, but really that it becomes something that they engage in and that they believe in and that'll affect their lives. So really trying to get more youth leaders and gatekeepers involved in the program would be something that we want to do in our next steps. And as always, continued evaluation. So for data we already collected, we will want to perform more statistical analyses, maybe combine years of data, and really see how the evaluation in the future can include some more centers and some more schools that will be implementing Shifting Boundaries in California as part of the RPE program. So we should have more data to share in the next few years, and we'll be continuing our implementation in California.
Thanks. So we've been getting a lot of questions in. So I'm going to answer a couple of easy ones first. So is there a way to watch this again? Yes, there will be a web recording available, and we can share resources, the link to access the recording in the text chat. Also, for people who are asking about resources, and so Tori shared Nan Stein's website there, and we're also going to be sharing a previous web conference on Shifting Boundaries that also has some resources there. In terms of questions for Alaina and Mina, one of the ones that was coming up kind of earlier on was along the lines of, I'm guessing this question might be for you, Alaina. In terms of framing, has this come up at all in the school you're working with in terms of positive framing versus negative, like instead of don't violate my boundaries, the more positive framing around things? Has that been a theme at all?
Yeah, no, and that's great, and I remember seeing that too. And so we really, as an agency too, that's something that we adapt as well, is that the program, the Shifting Boundaries program, really allows for that language. So we do focus a lot more on what does the positive look like and using that positive language rather than saying what not to do. And so we really adapt that that language and that framing. So for example, we focus on, I'm trying to think just real quick, we'll talk about like when, you know, what it looks like to have these conversations, or we won't say like, don't cross people's boundaries necessarily, but we'll say like, hey, like how does it feel when someone doesn't cross your boundaries, and move into those language. So we're moving away from that tone of just don't, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Great. And then, you know, we talked about in this web conference about getting buy-in from different players and school administrators and teachers and all of that. And a question that I think a few people have been asking is about the parent involvement piece. And I know this is something that you're wanting to do more, so I don't know how much you have to share right now, but people are asking about how can we get parents more involved. And we did have one suggestion in the text chat. Someone said to feed parents and have youth present on what they've learned through art, skits, etc. So I think that's a really neat idea. Food always brings people out, and I know parents like to see what their kids are doing, so that's a good suggestion. But do you have any tips on parent involvement?
This is Alaina. So we're still working on that as an agency as well, so I wish I had a better answer for that, but I really, I saw that suggestion too, and I thought that was great. We do engage parents. I know attending all the family nights and school orientations, parents are there, and that's a great way. So we set up a booth, and the school has us under a banner, or they'll have us maybe talk, and so we, you know, kind of start at those events, but I know that's something that we're also looking to expand ourselves and to improve on how we can really get parents to come in.
Mm-hmm. Great. And this is probably an easier yes-no question. Did you make any adaptations to the shifting boundaries work? And maybe Mina, you can answer that, if any adaptations were made in your implementation guidance.
I'll start with, so yeah, we actually did make some adaptations. So for example, we're like to be really visual, so some of the adaptations, or one of the adaptations that we made is that we turned all of the sessions into PowerPoint slides for students who, there were some classrooms that just responded better to PowerPoint and visuals, and so that was one thing that we had done. And I don't know if, Mina, you want to have stuff on your end as well.
Yeah, I would add that, you know, we don't have any specific adaptations that we document in the implementation guide, but as far as the curriculum and the lessons that are in the, like in NAN's, on NAN's website. But we do, you know, as part of, I guess, how we adapted it for California and for our RP program is really to add those additional components of requiring that it really be something that is presented to the school, and that it's that there's buy-in for the program before the program even starts being implemented. So that's kind of where we approach it, where we really want it to be a comprehensive program. So for that to happen, we felt like it needed to be something that the whole school, meaning the staff, the principal, and even like we mentioned, the yard duty, really gets behind and knows, you know, they know what it's about before it starts in the school.
And there's been some more text chatting about parental involvement, seems to be a theme today. And there is some more guidance along the lines of getting greatest parental attendance by, you know, trying to incorporate prevention information into events that parents are already going to. So, for example, sporting events. There was another recommendation of attending band or choir events. So I guess going to where parents are already going rather than creating separate things that are for sexual and domestic violence prevention. Ashley and Tori, what else has been, anything else you want to pull out here? Questions or themes?
Let's see, Alicia. This text chat has been so interactive, which is great. And I think that, I've been looking through, it's great to see people giving kind of like tips of like what worked for them or what they've tried. So I really appreciate you all kind of jumping in to do some problem solving. I like, when we're talking about making school-wide changes, it is so important for folks to really be known, and so not just leaning on those like one-off relationships that we have. But I think it was Bunny who said, I attend band and chorus events and games. And so I think, that goes back to the relationship building. Tori, was there something that you wanted to point to?
No, I think you touched on it, especially with the relationship building. I think ties back into a lot of the questions that are being asked, both how do we get buy-in, how do we get parents to want their children to attend, and being a familiar face in the school. So thank you everyone for providing the resources that you did and the tips that you provided each other. I think that made a really great impact on everyone in the text chat.
Yeah. I'm going to ask one more question. So one question that came up earlier was about evaluation. And I don't know how much you can share on this, but how do you evaluate the different components of the work, including the policy work? So I know there's the pre-post survey. Is there anything else that you'd like to share here, Lina or Alaina?
So for us, I think it's not something obviously that can be captured on a really like a pre-post survey necessarily, but for just looking at policy change, just making sure that whoever's facilitating it really documents what's going on, and even those little steps that are taken towards policy change. There's obviously not going to be a policy change that happens every single month of the program or even every single year. But there are little sort of baby steps that can be documented. So we really want to make sure, and Alaina is a great example of this because I know she's great at writing everything down that significant that happens. But even if you're meeting with, a principal and they say that they've adapted a procedure that they used to do this and now they do this other thing. That kind of documentation is something that kind of, really accounts towards an outcome. It's not something that we might necessarily consider to be, an outcome that can be documented, but it really is. And just making sure that that the stories that you tell about your school climate and the challenges and successes that you document, whether it's observations from a yard duty or a teacher or a principal or even students. That kind of documentation can go a long way in looking at the school climate and school environments.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great note to transition into some key takeaways for our participants today. So, Lina, if you'd like to start, or did I miss a slide here? Oh, okay. Yeah, Lina, if you'd like to start.
Okay, sure. So we do have a few lessons learned from our implementation during the last few years. I know we've said it a lot during this webinar, but really making sure that all the school staff is familiar with the curriculum being used. So this isn't just for shifting boundaries facilitators, but really for anyone who wants to affect community change and institutional change within a school setting. Otherwise, if staff and teachers are counteracting the messages that are part of your prevention program, it really undoes a lot of the positive changes in the social norms you're trying to change. And one other point that I want to make is like I said earlier, obtaining an MOU or a letter of commitment or some kind of formal commitment from the school is key to a success.
It kind of relates to my first point, but it's really a way to formalize the relationship with the school. So this is really a way your program can be framed as beneficial to both the school and your agency by putting this in writing. One other point is just to make sure that facilitators have space and time to document those successes and challenges that we've been talking about here today. That kind of goes back to what I just mentioned about documenting policy changes and procedure changes and that sort of school level, school climate change that goes on campuses, making sure that the facilitators have time to really write these things down, maybe on a regular basis if there's some kind of monthly process that can occur where they make sure that they have that space to do that. This is data that can be used. I mean, it's just as valid as pre-post data and just as valid as numbers. We want to make sure that this data gets captured and that this is documented as showing what happens on the school campus. And then the last point is to document the adaptations that you may be making. Like Alaina said, she documented that she adapted some of her curriculum into slides. Some of this can just really show what's working and what's not. If your target population doesn't seem to be responding to the curriculum, then we really need to figure out what's working and what isn't. So this is just making sure to document the adaptations so we know what needs to be adjusted, what needs to be added or taken away.
And Alaina, would you like to share your tips as well?
Yeah, definitely. So I know we talked about this just a little bit, but make sure that you're really part of the school, that they don't just see you as an outsider. And so it really helps when we went into the schools and we shadowed the classrooms, and so the students were familiar with us and the conversations we're having. They're not like, oh, well, you're going to leave and this ends. It's like, no, this is coming from the school environment, and that's really, really important. And then also on that note, that's also includes involving all the staff, right? So we don't want to forget about key staff. I would suggest just paying attention or asking your students, who do they trust, who do they look up to, what are the teachers or the faculty that really influence students, because there's always those key faculty members that have really strong peer influences as well, and that's really important. Making sure that the counselor is involved or whoever's going to be handling disclosures. So I know there's a period we didn't have a counselor, and so that was shared between the vice principal and the principal, and so it was really working with them about what's going to happen during these disclosures and talking with teachers about what the protocols and processes are, because oftentimes teachers get left out of the loop, and so if they're not in the loop, they're not involved. And then addressing the diversity of your area as well. So like I said before, we have a really diverse area, and so something that we've done is that we have several students who, speak Spanish and they're not comfortable in English, so we, translated some documents to Spanish to help with that, and then bringing in that cultural competency is really important as well. And then just my last thing is just sharing the data and keep open communication with the school. This is data that you're collecting from their students. It's good for them to see what the results are as well and what their students are saying, and really linking up student voices with the faculty, and that's really important to let the students also share how they're feeling as well.
Thank you both for sharing your tips and just sharing everything with us today. I know we've had quite an active session with lots of questions, and really appreciate everything that you've been able to share with others. So before we end today, we do want to, give some tools and resources. A lot's already been shared in the text chat today, so hopefully you've been able to access some of those resources as we've gone. We just have a couple more to share. So one is we did a Prevent Connect web conference earlier this year that was about participatory action in schools, And so recommend you check that out, which also had one of the guests focus on their hotspot mapping in schools in Colorado, and also just the other guest was talking about arts-based approaches in schools. So if you're interested in learning about more school-based work, you can check that out. And then there was a 2013 recording on shifting boundaries, and there were some resources on that page as well. So you can access that, and I know more things were shared in the text chat earlier, so hopefully you can access those resources. Mina did mention that she wanted to share her contact information, so that's here for you. And Mina, Alaina, anything else you'd like to say today?
I just want to say thank you. So, sorry. I just want to say thank you for having us, and it's been great also in the chat, just seeing everybody's comments and suggestions and stuff that they've been doing has been really awesome seeing that too, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. We really, again, appreciate the time that you took to share with all of us today, and we're glad that we were able to have a successful first web conference on Adobe Connect. So I'll hand it off to Ashley to close us out for today.
Thanks, Lisa. Thank you, Mina and Alaina. So great hearing from you both and the work that you're doing here in California. And thank you all so much for participating. I'm so excited that we successfully did a web conference on our new platform. So yay! Thank you for being part of that. This web conference was recorded. We will be working to get the recording up on our website within a week or so, but you can access the PowerPoint now. We'll send an email when that recording is available, and we'll also make the text chat of the transcript available. So if you didn't get to copy all the links to things or get names of people or things that you wanted to check out, we'll make that available to you. I'm trying to think what else. We hope that you'll join us for our web conference next month. We'll be announcing that in the next few weeks. We also have a really exciting podcast series out of the state of North Carolina, where they're doing work with bars and alcohol-serving establishments to prevent sexual violence. And so we're going to be releasing that shortly, so stay tuned for that. But again, I just want to thank you all for joining us. We will be sending out an evaluation survey in a couple minutes following the web conference, and we really do appreciate hearing from you. We look at every single evaluation survey, and it's really, really helpful. So if you have a few minutes and you can do that for us, we appreciate it. There's also, at the end of the survey, a link to a certificate of attendance. Could not speak suddenly. So if you have any questions or need anything else, you're more than welcome to contact me. But again, thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you to our friends at Prevention Institute, to Mina and Alaina, and to you all for being part of this vibrant community of prevention practitioners. Take care. This concludes our web conference for today.